Twilight by Stephenie Meyer.
Where's the first page?
I don't know.
Why is there a Bible quote on the first page?
Just go. Just go. Stupid book.
You can't say stupid book.
Great book.
Chapter 1. First Sight. My mother drove me to the airport with the windows rolled down. It was 75 degrees in Phoenix. The sky was a perfect cloudless blue. I was wearing my favorite shirt, sleeveless, with white eyelet lace. I was wearing it as a farewell gesture. My carry-on item was a parka. In the Olympic Peninsula of northwest Washington state, a small town named Forks exists under a near-constant cover of clouds. It rains on this inconsequential town more than any other place in the United States of America. It was from this town and its gloomy, omnipresent shade that my mother escaped with me when I was only a few months old. It was in this town that I'd be compelled to spend a month every summer until I was 14. This is too quiet. That was the year I finally put my foot down. These past 3 summers, it was my dad, Charlie, vacationed with me in California for 2 weeks instead. It was to Forks that I now exiled myself, an action that I took with great horror. I detested Forks. I loved Phoenix. I loved someone's printing something. I loved the sun and the blistering heat. I loved the vigorous, sprawling city.
Bella.
My mom told me.
The last of 1,000 times.
Oh, wait. Oh, that's me.
Oh, that's what I
The
was...
last of 1,000 times before I got on the plane.
You don't have to do this.
My mom looked like me, except with short hair and laugh lines. I felt a spasm of panic as I stared at her wide, childlike eyes. How could I leave my loving, erratic, harebrained mother to fend for herself? Of course, she had Phil now, so the bills would probably get paid. There would be food in the refrigerator, gas in her car, and someone to call when she got lost. But still,
I want to go.
I lied. I'd always been a bad liar, but I'd been saying this lie so frequently that it sounded almost convincing now.
Tell Charlie I said hi. I will. I'll see you soon.
She insisted.
You can come home whenever you want. I'll come right back as soon as you need me.
But I could see the sacrifice in her eyes behind the promise.
Don't worry about me,
I urged.
It'll be great. I love you, Mom.
She hugged me tightly for a minute, and then I got on the plane, and she was gone. It's a 4-hour flight from Phoenix to Seattle, another hour in a small plane up to Port Angeles, and then an hour drive back down to Forks. Flying doesn't bother me. The hour in the car with Charlie, though, I was a little worried about. Charlie had been fairly nice about the whole thing.
Keep going.
It's disgusting.
I can't see.
You don't have any quote. He seemed genuinely pleased that I was coming to live with him for the first time with any degree of permanence.
You can see the burp.
Shut up. He'd already gotten me registered for high school, and he was going to help me get a car. But it sure was going to be awkward with Charlie. Neither of us was what anyone would call verbose, and I didn't know what there was to say regardless. I knew he was more than a little confused by my decision, like my mother before me. I hadn't made a secret of my distaste for Forks. It's the name of the town. It's Forks. When I landed in Port Angeles, it was raining. I didn't see it as an omen, just unavoidable. I already said my goodbyes to the sun. Charlie was waiting for me with the cashier. This I was expecting too. Charlie is a police chief swan to
Is Charlie the lover boy?
No, Charlie's her dad. Charlie is the police chief swan to the people of Forks. My primary motivation behind buying a car, despite the scarcity of my funds, was that I refused to be driven around town in a car with red and blue lights on top. Nothing slows down traffic like a cop. Charlie gave me an awkward one-armed hug when I scumbled my way off the plane.
It's good to see you, Bells,
He said, smiling as he automatically caught and studied me.
You haven't changed much. How's Renee? Mom's fine. It's good to see you too, Dad.
I wasn't allowed to call him Charlie to his face. I had only a few bags. Most of my Arizona clothes were too permeable for Washington. My mom and I had pooled our resources to supplement my winter wardrobe, but it was still scanty. It all I don't know what that means. It all fit easily into the trunk of the cruiser,
I found a good car for you. Really cheap.
he announced when we were strapped in.
What kind of car?
I was suspicious of the way he said,
Good car for you.
as opposed to just,
Good car. Well, it's a truck actually. A Chevy. Where'd you find it? Do you remember Billy Black down at La Push?
La Push is a tiny Indian reservation on the coast,
No. He used to go fishing with us during the summer.
Charlie prompted. That would explain why I didn't remember him. I do a good job of blocking painful, unnecessary things from my memory.
He's in a wheelchair now.
Charlie continued when I didn't respond.
So he can't drive anymore. And he offered to sell me this truck cheap. What year is it?
I could see from his change of expression that this was the question he was hoping I wouldn't ask.
Billy's did a lot of work on the engine. It's only a few years old, really.
I hoped he didn't think so little of me as to believe I would give up that easily.
When did he buy it? He bought it in 1984, I think. Did he buy it new? Well, no. I think it was new in the early 60s or late 50s at the earliest.
He admitted sheepishly.
Dad!
Bella.
Stop. Dad! I was screaming. Oh. Dad, I don't really know anything about cars. I won't be able to fix it if anything went wrong. And I couldn't afford a mechanic. Really, Bella, the thing runs great. They don't build them like that anymore.
The Thing, I thought to myself. It had possibilities, as a nickname at the very least.
How cheap is it? Oh, wait, how cheap is cheap?
After all, that was part I couldn't compromise on.
Well, honey, I kind of already bought it for you as a homecoming gift.
Charlie peeked sideways at me with a hopeful expression. Wow, free.
You didn't need to do that, Dad. I was gonna buy myself a car. I don't mind. I want you to be happy here.
He was looking ahead at the road when he said this. Charlie wasn't comfortable with expressing his emotions out loud. I inherited that from him, so I was looking straight ahead as I responded.
That's really nice, Dad. Thanks. Thanks. I really appreciate it.
No need to add that to my being happy in Forks as an impossibility. He didn't need to suffer long with me, and I never looked a free truck in the mouth or engine. It's like you never look a gift horse in the mouth. Okay, whatever.
Well, now you're welcome.
He mumbled, embarrassed by my thanks. We exchanged a few more comments on the weather, which was wet, and that was pretty much it for conversation. We stared out the windows in silence. It was beautiful, of course. I couldn't deny that. Everything was green. The trees, their trunks covered with moss, their branches hanging with a canopy of it. The ground covered with ferns, even the air filtered down greenly through the leaves. It was too green, an alien planet. Eventually, we made it to Charlie's. He still lived in the small 2-bedroom house that he'd bought with my mother in the early days of their marriage. Those were the only kind days their marriage had, the early ones. There, parked on the street in front of the house that never changed, was my new to me, truck. It was a faded red color with big round fenders and a bulbous cab. To my intense surprise, I loved it. I didn't know if it would run, but I could see myself in it. Plus, it was One of those solid iron affairs that never gets damaged. The kind you see at the scene of an accident, paint on the scratch, surrounded by the pieces of the foreign car it had destroyed. I never see a car like that.
Wow, Dad, I love it. Thanks.
Now my horrific day tomorrow would be just that much less dreadful. I wouldn't be faced with the choice of either walking 2 miles in the rain to school or accepting a ride in the Chief's cruiser.
I'm glad you like it.
Charlie said gruffly, embarrassed again. It only took one trip to get all my stuff upstairs. I got the west bedroom that faced out over the front yard. The room was familiar. It had belonged to me since I was born. The wooden floor, the light blue walls, the peaked ceiling, the yellow-laced curtains around the window. Bella. These were all a part. You could do it away from the microphone. These were all a part of my childhood. The only changes Charlie had ever made were switching the crib for a bed and adding a desk as I grew. The desk now held a second-hand computer with the phone line for the modem stapled along the floor to the nearest phone jack. This was a stipulation for my mother so that we could stay in touch easily. The rocking chair from my baby days was still in the corner. There was only one bathroom at the top of the stairs, which I would have to share with Charlie. I was trying not to dwell too much on that fact. One of the best things about Charlie is he doesn't hover. He left me to unpack and get settled, a feat that would have been altogether impossible for my mother. It was nice to be alone, to not to smile and look pleased, with a relief to stare dejectedly out the window at the sheening rain and let just a few tears escape. I wasn't in the mood to go on a real crying jag. I could save that for bedtime, but I would have to think about the coming morning. Forks High School had a frightening total of only 357, now 58 students. There were more than 700 people in my junior class alone back home. All of the kids here had grown up together. Their grandparents had been toddlers together. I would be the only new girl from a big city, a curiosity, a freak. Maybe if I looked like a girl from Phoenix should, I could work this to my advantage, but physically I never fit in anywhere. I should be tan, sporty, blonde, a volleyball player, or a cheerleader perhaps, all things that could go with living in the Valley of the Sun. Instead, I was Ivory's kid, without even the excuse of blue or red hair, despite the constant sunshine. I had always been a little slender, but soft somehow. Obviously not an athlete, but I didn't have the necessary hand-eye coordination to play sports without humiliating myself and harming both myself and anyone else who stood close. When I finished putting my clothes... I lost my spot in the sentence, sorry. When I finished putting my clothes in the old pine dresser, I took my bag of bathroom necessities, tampons, and went to the communal bathroom to clean myself up as the date of... I looked at my face in the mirror.
Did you be a fire?
Not yet.
I was gonna say. Keep going.
I looked at my face in the mirror as I brushed through my tangled, damp hair. Maybe it was the light, but already I looked swallow or unhealthy. It doesn't say tampons also.
I know.
Okay. My skin could be pretty. It was very clear, almost translucent looking, but it all depended on color. I had no color here. Facing my pallid reflection in the mirror, I was forced to admit that I was lying to myself. It wasn't just physically that I never fit in. And if I couldn't find a niche in a school with 3,000 people, what were my chances here? It means you're a loser. It means you're a horrible person and no one likes you. If nobody out of 3... Okay. I didn't relate well to people my age. Maybe the truth was that I didn't relate well to people, period.
Take a hint.
Even my mother, who I was closer to than anyone else on the planet, was never in harmony with me, never on exactly the same page. Sometimes I wondered if we were seeing the same things through my through my eyes that the rest of the world was seeing through theirs. You should throw that away. Maybe there was a glitch in my brain. That's called... But that didn't matter. All that mattered was the effect. And tomorrow, would just be the beginning. I didn't sleep well that night, even after I was done crying. The constant whooshing of the rain and wind flew across the roof wouldn't fade into the background. I pulled the faded old quilt over my head and later added the pillow too, but I couldn't fall asleep until after midnight when the rain finally settled into a quieter drizzle. Do you want to take over a little bit?
No.
Thick fog was all I could see. Bella, stop.
Sorry, it's a habit. I do it at school a lot.
What?
Keep going.
That's weird. Don't do that.
I like seeing the dead skin. Go.
Thick fog was all I could see stop singing, out my window in the morning, and I could feel the claustrophobia creeping up on me. You could never see the sky here. It was like a cage. Breakfast with Charlie was a quiet event. He wished me luck at school. I thanked him, knowing his hope was wasted. Good luck tended to avoid me. Charlie left first, off to the police station. That was his wife and family. After he left, I sat at the old square oak table in one of the 3 unmatching chairs and examined his small kitchen with its dark paneled walls, bright yellow cabinets, and white linoleum floor. Nothing was changed. My mother had painted the cabinets 18 years ago in an attempt to bring some sunshine into the house. Over the small fireplace in the adjoining handkerchiefs family room was a row of pictures. First, a wedding picture of Charlie and my mom in Las Vegas. Then, one of the 3 of us in the hospital after I was born, taken by a helpful nurse, followed by the procession of my school pictures up to last year's. Those were embarrassing to look. Those were embarrassing to look at. I would have to see what I could do to get Charlie to put them somewhere else, at least while I was living here. It was impossible being in this house not to realize that Charlie had never gotten over my mom. It made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to be too early to school, but I couldn't stay in the house anymore. I donned my jacket, which had the feel of a biohazard suit, and headed out into the rain. It was just drizzling still, not enough to soak me through immediately as I reached for the house key that was always hidden under the eaves by the door and locked up. The sloshing of my new waterproof boots was unnerving. I missed the normal crunch of gravel as I walked. That's what I was thinking. I couldn't pause and admire my truck again as I wanted. I was in a hurry to get out of the misty wet that swirled around my head and clung to my hair under my hood. Inside the truck, it was nice and dry. Either Billy or Charlie had obviously cleaned it up, but the tan, upholstered seats smelled... I thought that's a poo. Still smelled faintly of tobacco, gasoline, and peppermint. The engine started quickly to my relief, but loudly roaring to life and then idling at top volume. Well, a truck this old was bound to have a flaw. The antique radio worked, a plus that I hadn't expected. But, wow, my gosh. Okay, here's the first quote. Finding the school wasn't difficult, though I'd never been there before. The school is like most other things, just off the highway. It was not obvious that it was a school, only this... Hold on, I'm taking a picture, Wesley.
Chin?
Yeah.
He's resting on the thing.
No. Hey, take a picture again if he does it. Okay. Where was I?
I don't know.
Finding the school wasn't difficult. It was not obvious that it was a school on the sign, which declared it to be Forks High School, made me stop. It looked like a collection of matching houses built with maroon-colored bricks. They should have said brick-colored bricks. Sorry. There were so many trees and shrubs, I couldn't see its size at first. What was the feel of the institution? I wondered nostalgically. Where were the chain-link fences? The metal detectors? I walked in the front of the first building, which had a small sign. Oh, are you taking a video? No one... Oh, front office. No one else was parked there, so I was sure it was off limits, but I decided I would get directions inside instead of circling around the rain like an idiot. I stepped unwillingly out of the toasty truck cab and walked down a little stone path linked with dark hedges. I took a deep breath before opening the door. Inside it was brightly lit and warmer than I had hoped. The office was a little waiting area with padded folding chairs, orange-flecked commercial carpet, notices and awards cluttering the walls, a big clock ticking loudly. Plants grew everywhere in large plastic pots as if there wasn't enough greenery outside. The room was cut in half by a long counter. I know, cluttered with I've been to a high school. Cluttered with wire baskets full of papers and brightly colored flowers. Okay, blah. There were three desks behind the counter, one of which was managed by a large, red-haired woman wearing glasses. She was wearing a purple t-shirt, which immediately made me feel overdressed. The red-haired woman looked up.
Can I help you? I'm Isabella Swan,
I informed her, and saw the immediate awareness light in her eyes. I was expected a topic of gossip, no doubt. Daughter of the chief's flighty ex-wife, come home at last.
Of course,
she said. She dug through a precariously stacked pile of documents on her desk till she found the one she was looking for.
I have your schedule right here and a map of the school.
She brought several sheets to the counter to show me. She went through my classes for me, highlighting the best route to each on the map, and gave me a slip to have each teacher sign, which I was to bring back at the end of the day. She smiled at me and hoped, like Charlie, that I would like it here in Forks. I smiled back as convincingly as I could. Oh no, people wanting something good to happen to you. That sucks. When I went back out to my truck, other students were starting to arrive. I drove around the school following the line of traffic. I was glad to see... No, you don't. One of them... Stop. Stop biting your nails.
It's a hangnail.
Stop.
Read the book.
I can't when you're biting your hands. When you're getting spit all over your fingers next to me. There's some cars older than mine, nothing flashy. At home, I'd lived in one of the few lower income neighborhoods that were included in the Paradise Valley district. It was a common thing to see a new...
Olivia, you just farted.
No, that was a burp. That was a fart. Hey, you don't have to do that.
I hate burps.
Would you rather I fart and make it smelly?
Yes.
Oh, I was a poor kid in California, boo-hoo. I looked at the map in the truck, trying to memorize it now. Hopefully I wouldn't have to walk around it with it stuck in front of my nose all day. I stuffed everything in my bag, slung this trap over my shoulder, and sucked in a huge breath. I can do this, I lied. Oh.
I can do this.
I lied to myself feebly. No one was going to bite me. I finally exhaled and stepped out of the truck. I kept my face pulled back into my hood as I walked to the sidewalk crowded with teenagers. My plain black jacket didn't stand out, I noticed with relief. Once I got around to the cafeteria, building 3 was easy to spot. A large black 3 was painted on a white square on the east corner. I felt my breathing gradually creeping toward hyperventilation as I approached the door. I tried holding my breath as I followed 2 unisex raincoats through the door. Stop, this is not funny. The classroom was small. 2 people in front of me stopped just get up. Just inside the door to hang up their coats on a low row of hooks. I copied them. They were 2 girls, one a porcelain color. Are you still laughing?
Let's do it. Go.
The other also was pale with light brown hair. At least my skin wouldn't be a standout here. I took the slip up to the teacher, a tall, balding man whose desk had a nameplate. Identifying him.
Mr. Guy.
Should I say Mr. Guy instead of Mr. Mason?
Yes.
A nameplate identifying him as Mr. Guy. He cocked at me when he saw my name. Not an encouraging response. And of course I flushed tomato red. But at least he sent me to an empty desk at the back without introducing me to the class. It was harder for my new classmates to stare at me in the back, but somehow they managed. I kept my eyes down on the reading list the teacher had given me. It was fairly basic. Bront, Shakespeare, Chaucer, Faulkner. I know how to say. I'd already read everything. That was comforting and boring. I wondered if my mom would send me my folder of old essays, or if she would think that I was cheating. I went through different arguments with her in my head while the teacher droned on. When the bell rang, a nasal buzzing sound, a gangly boy with skin problems and hair black as oil slick leaned across the aisle to talk to me.
Is this the lover boy?
You're
Isabella Swan, aren't you?
You looked like the overly helpful I don't think it is Edward. Chess club type.
Bella.
I corrected. Everyone within a 3-seat radius turned to look at me.
What's your next class?
He asked. I had to check in my bag.
Government with Jefferson in building 6.
There was nowhere to look without meeting curious eyes.
I'm heading
Eric.
I'm heading towards building 4. I could show you the way.
Definitely over helpful.
I'm Eric,
he added. I smiled tentatively.
Thanks.
We got our jackets and headed out into the rain, which had picked up. I could have sworn several people behind us were walking close enough to eavesdrop. Well, she really thinks she's the center of the world, doesn't she?
She thinks the world revolves around her. That's why she's
Nobody
named Bella.
cares about you.
That's why she's named Bella after me.
No. I hoped I wasn't getting paranoid.
So, this is a lot different than Phoenix, huh?
Yeah. Bella! He asked.
Very. It doesn't rain much there, does it? 3 or 4 times a year. Wow. What must that be like?
He wondered.
Sunny?
I told him.
You don't look very tan. My mother is part albino. Go!
Her mom is part albino? What?
I don't know. Just go.
He studied my face apprehensively, and I sighed. It looked like clouds and a sense of humor didn't mix. A few months of this, and I'd forget how to use sarcasm.
Sure.
We walked back around the cafeteria to the south buildings by the gym. Eric walked me right to the door, though it was clearly marked.
Well, good luck,
he said as I touched the handle.
Maybe we'll have some other classes together.
He sounded hopeful. I smiled at him vaguely and went inside. The rest of the morning passed in about the same fashion. My trigonometry teacher, Mr. Varner, who I would have hated anyway just because of the subject he taught. Get that? Bella Swan hates math teachers. Was the only one who made me stand in front of the class and introduce myself. I stammered, blushed, and tripped over my own boots
Just an itsy-bitsy accident.
on the way to my seat. After 2 classes, I started to recognize several of the faces in each class. There was always someone braver than the others who would introduce himself and ask me questions about how I was liking forks. I tried to
You like forks?
I tried to be diplomatic, but mostly I just lied a lot. At least I never needed the map. One girl sat next to me in both Trig and Spanish, and she walked with me to the cafeteria for lunch. She was tiny, several inches shorter than my 5 feet 4 inches. But her wildly curly, dark hair made up a lot of the difference between our heights. I couldn't remember her name, so I smiled. You just met her.
Yeah.
And so I smiled and nodded as she prattled about teachers and smiled. I didn't try to keep up. We sat at the end of a full table with several of her friends who she introduced to me. I forgot all their names as soon as she spoke them. They seemed impressed by her bravery in speaking to me. The boy from English, Eric, waved at me from across the room. It was there, sitting in the lunchroom, trying to make conversation with 7 curious strangers. That I first saw them. They were sitting in the corner of the cafeteria, as far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking and they weren't eating, though they each had a tray of untouched food in front of them. They weren't gawking at. Why don't they just, eat it? They weren't gawking at me unlike most other students, so it was safe to stare at them without fear of meeting an excessively interested pair of eyes. But none of these things that caught and held my attention. They didn't look anything alike. Of the 3 boys, one was big.
Edward!
Muscled, like a serious, I don't think that's him.
Oh.
Weightlifter with dark curly hair. Another was taller, leaner, but still muscular and honey blonde. The last was lanky, less bulky, with an untidy bronze-colored hair. Yeah, he was more boyish than the others, who looked like they could be in college or even teachers here rather than students. The girls were opposites. The tall one was statuesque. She had a beautiful figure, the kind you saw on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. That's kind of gay. The kind that made every girl around her take a hit on her self-esteem just by being in the same room. Her hair was golden, gently waving to the middle of her back. The short girl was pixie-like, thin in the extreme with small features. Her hair was a deep black, cropped short and pointing in every direction, and yet they were all exactly alike. Every one of them was chalky pale, the palest of the students living in the sunless town, paler than me, the albino.
Oh my gosh!
They all had very dark eyes despite their range in hair tones. They also had dark shadows under those eyes, purplish, bruise-like shadows. As if they were all suffering from a sleepless night or almost done recovering from a broken nose. Though their noses, all their features were straight, perfect, angular. But all this is not why I could look away. I stared at their faces so different, so similar, were all devastatingly, inhumanly beautiful. They were faces you'd never expect to see, except perhaps on the airbrushed pages of a fashion magazine, or so vampires are sexy, or painted by an old master as the face of an angel. It was hard to decide who was the most beautiful. Maybe the perfect blonde girl, or the bronze-haired boy. They were all looking away from each other, away from other students, away from anything in particular as far as I could tell. As I watched, the small girl rose with her tray, unopened soda, unbitten apple, and walked away with a quick, graceful lope that belonged on a runway. I watched amazed at her lithe dancer's step till she dumped her tray and glided through the back door faster than I would have thought possible. My eyes darted back to the I thought I heard someone.
I did too.
Hello? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, oh, you scared me. Okay, keep going.
You're so gross, Bella.
It sounds like a pause, like we were waiting for it.
Everyone get ready for the fart.
Keep going.
Okay. Then my eyes darted back to the others who started. We're reading this.
Yeah.
We're
Twilight.
we're recording an audiobook.
Yeah.
It's gonna be really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
You guys have fun.
Yeah, we will.
I am having fun.
Hey,
Good. Good to hear. That's all that matters.
who are they?
I asked the girl from my spin. How I feel weird talking.
Okay.
I asked the girl from my Spanish
Talk normally.
whose name I'd forgotten. Oh, that's me. As she looked up to see who I meant, though already knowing, probably from my tone, suddenly he looked at her, the thinner one, the boyish one, the youngest, perhaps. He looked at my neighbor for just... What are the neighbors? For just a fraction of a second, and then his dark eyes flickered to mine. He looked away quickly, more quickly than I could, though in a flash of embarrassment, I dropped my eyes at once. In that brief flash of a glance, his face held nothing of interest. It was as if she had called his name, and he looked up in involuntary response, already having decided not to answer. My neighbor giggled in embarrassment, looking at the table like I did.
That's Edward and Emmett Cullen and Rosalie and Jasper Hale. The one who left was Alice Cullen. They all lived together with Dr. Cullen and his wife.
She said this under her breath. I glanced sideways at the beautiful boy who was looking at his tray now, picking a bagel to pieces with long, pale
What
fingers.
the heck?
His mouth was moving very quickly, his perfect lips barely opening. The other three still looked away, and I felt he was speaking quietly to them. Strange, unpopular names, I thought. The kind of names grandparents had. Alice? Jasper isn't uncommon. Edward isn't uncommon. Rosalie. But maybe that was in vogue here. Small town names. I finally remembered that my neighbor was called Jessica, a perfectly common name. There were 2 girls named Jessica in my history class back home.
They are very nice looking.
I struggled with the conspicuous statement.
Yes!
Jessica agreed with another giggle.
They're all together though. Emmett and Rosalie and Jasper and Alice. And they live together.
Her voice held all the shock and condemnation of the small town, I thought critically. But if I was being honest, I had to admit that even in Phoenix, it would cause gossip.
Which ones are the Cullens?
I asked.
They don't look related. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s or early 30s. They're all adopted. The Hales are brother and sister, twins, the Blondes, and their foster children. They look a little old for foster children. They are now. Jasper and Rosalie are both 18. But they've been with Mrs. Cullen since they were 8. She's their aunt or something like that. That's really kind of nice for them to take care of all those kids like that when they're so young and everything. I guess so.
Jessica admitted reluctantly, and I got the impression that she didn't like the doctor and his wife for some reason. With the glances she was throwing at their adopted children, I would presume the reason was jealousy.
I think that Mrs. Cullen can't have any kids, though,
She added, as if that lessened their kindness. Throughout all this conversation, my eyes flickered again and again to the table where the strange family sat. They continued to look at the walls and not eat.
Have they always lived in forks?
I asked. Surely I would have noticed them on one of my summers here,
No.
she said in a voice that implied it should be obvious, even to a new arrival like me.
They just moved down 2 years ago from somewhere in Alaska.
I felt a surge of pity and relief. Pity because as beautiful as they were outsiders, clearly not accepted. Relief that I wasn't the only newcomer here, and certainly not the most interesting by any standard. Hold on. As I examined them, the youngest one of the Cullens looked up and met my gaze, this time with evident curiosity in his expression. Stop making... As I looked swiftly away, it seemed to me that his glance held some kind of unmet expectation.
Which one is the boy with the reddish-brown hair?
I asked. I peeked at him from the corner of my eye, and he was still staring at me, but not gawking like the other students had today. He had a slightly frustrated expression. I looked down again.
That's Edward. He's gorgeous, of course, but don't waste your time. He doesn't date. Apparently, none of the girls here are good-looking enough for him.
She sniffed, a clear case of sour grapes. I wondered when he'd turn her down. I bit my lip to hide my smile. Then I glanced at him again. His face was turned away, but I thought his cheek appeared lifted, as if he were smiling too. After a few minutes, the four of them left the table together. They were all noticeably graceful, even the big brawny one. It was unsettling to watch. The one named Edward didn't look at me again. I sat at a table with Jessica and her friends longer than I would have if I had been sitting alone. I was anxious not to be late from class on my first day. One of the new acquaintances who considerately reminded me that her name was Angela had biology 2 with me next hour. We walked into class together in silence. She was shy too. We went to the classroom. Angela went to sit at the black top lab table.
Unimportant information.
I don't know.
She went and sat at the black table.
She sat her plump, round tuchus on the wooden chair.
That was tightly grasped
That was
on the
made in
ground.
1949 in this factory at these coordinates in the United States.
And it was tightly screwed to the ground. Very obvious, even to the boy in the corner's eyes. As we both looked down at the chair, I could feel something between us, even as we were across the room. Staring at each other eye to eye, I could see his pupils dilate. What the heck?
Okay, where was I? When we entered the classroom, Angela went to sit down at the black top lab table, exactly like the ones I was used to. She already had a neighbor. In fact, all of the tables were filled but one. Next to the center aisle, I recognized Edward Cullen by his unusual hair, sitting next to that single open chair.
Only, haha. Did you just fart?
No! As I was shushing you. As I walked down the aisle to introduce myself to the teacher and get my slip signed, I was watching him surreptitiously. Just as I passed, he suddenly went rigid in his seat. He stared at me again, meeting my eyes with the strangest expression on his face. It was hostile, furious. I looked away quickly, shocked, going red again. I stumbled over a book in the walkway and had to catch myself on the edge of a table. The girl sitting there giggled. I noticed that his eyes were black, cold black.
Like I said.
His pupil dilate. No, it's because he's hungry, because he's a disgusting vampire.
He's a vampire. I thought she was a vampire.
No, he's a vampire. She doesn't turn into a vampire until much later. Ooh, look at that.
I know.
Ew, I touched it. It's okay.
I'm just kidding.
Should you hold it up to the microphone thing you can see? Touch.
That was my toe skin. Okay. It's like
Mr. Shush. Mr. Benner signed my... Well, wait. I could tell we were going to... Wesley. We were going to get along. Of course, he had no choice but to send me to the one open seat in the middle of the room. I kept my eyes down, and I went to sit by him. Bewildered by the antagonistic stare he'd given me. I didn't look up as I set my book on the table and took my seat, but I saw his posture change from the corner of my eye. He was leaning away from me, sitting on the extreme edge of his chair and averting his face like he smelled something bad. Inconspicuously, he sniffed my hair. It smelled like strawberries. The scent... Wesley, stop.
Stinky.
Scent of my favorite shampoo. It seemed an innocent enough odor. I let my my hair fall over my right shoulder and making a dark curtain between us. I tried to pay attention to the teacher. Oh my gosh, my voice is getting... How long is
Me
this
to read it now?
chapter? Yeah,
Where are you?
unfortunately.
Unfortunately, the lecture was on cellular anatomy, something I'd already studied. I took notes carefully anyway, always looking down. I couldn't stop myself from peeking occasionally through the screen of my hair at the strange boy next to me. During the whole class, he never relaxed his stiff position on the edge of his chair, sitting as far from me as possible. I could see his hand on his left leg was clenched into a fist, tendons standing out under his pale skin. This, too, he never relaxed. He had the long sleeve of his white shirt pushed up to his elbows, and his forearm was surprisingly hard and muscular between his light skin. He wasn't nearly as slight as he looked next to his burly brother. The class seemed to drag on longer than the others. Was it because the day was finally coming to a close, or because I was waiting for his tight fist to loosen? It never did. He continued to sit so still it looked like he wasn't breathing. What was wrong with him? Was this his normal behavior? I questioned my judgment on Jessica's bitterness at lunch today. Maybe she was not as resentful as I thought. It couldn't have anything to do with me. He didn't know me from Eve. I picked up at him one more time and regretted it. He was glaring down at me again, his black eyes full of revulsion. As I flinched away from him, shrinking against my chair, the phrase, "if looks could kill," suddenly ran through my mind.
Wow, so deep.
So deep, bro. At that moment, the bell rang loudly, making me jump, and Edward Cullen was out of his seat. Fluidly, he rose.
Great is like saying gracefully.
He was much taller than I thought, his back to me, and he was out the door before anyone else was out of their seat. I sat frozen in my seat, staring blankly after him. He was so mean! It wasn't fair. I began gathering up my things slowly. What did he even do?
He was kind of rude.
I began gathering up my things slowly, trying to block the anger that filled me. For fear my eyes would tear up. For some reason, my temper was hardwired to my tear ducts. I usually cried when I was angry, a humiliating tendency.
Aren't you Bella Wait, hold on, should I...
Aren't you Isabella Swan?
Aren't you Bella Swan?
Isabella.
Aren't you Isabella Swan?
A male voice asked. I looked up to see a cute, baby-faced boy, his pale blonde hair gracefully gelled into orderly spikes, smiling at me in a friendly way. He obviously didn't think I smelled bad.
Bella.
I corrected him with a smile.
I'm Mike. Hi, Mike. Do you need any help finding your next class? I'm headed to the gym, actually. I think I can find it. That's my next class, too.
He seemed thrilled, though it wasn't that big of a coincidence in a school this small. We walked to class together. He was a chatterer. He supplied most of the conversation, what made it easy for me. He lived in California until he was 10, so he knew how I felt about the sun. It turned out he was in my English class also. Ugh. He was the nicest person I met today. But as we were entering the gym, he asked, "So did you stab Edward Cullen with a pencil or what? I've never seen him act like that." I cringed, so I wasn't the only one who had noticed. And apparently, that wasn't Edward Cullen's usual behavior. I decided to play dumb. Was that the boy I sat next to in biology? I asked artlessly. Yes, he said. He looked like he was in pain or something. I don't know, I responded. I never spoke to him. He's a weird guy. Mike lingered by me instead of heading to the dressing room. If I were lucky enough to sit by you, I would have talked to you. I smiled at him before walking to through the girls' locker room door. He was friendly and clearly admiring, but it wasn't enough to ease my irritation. What? Coach Clapp! Coach Clapp has to clap. The gym teacher, Coach Clapp, found me a uniform, but didn't make me dress down for today's class. At home, only 2 years of PE were required. Here, PE was mandatory for all 4 years. Forks was literally my personal hell on earth. I watched 4 Oh no, I have to take 4 years of PE. I'm in hell. I watched 4 volleyball games running simultaneously. Remembering how many injuries I had sustained and inflicted. Playing volleyball, I felt faintly nauseated. The final bell rang at last. I walked slowly to to the office to return my paperwork. The train had drifted away, but the wind was
rain.
strong.
The rain
What did I
drifted
say?
away. You said train. It's
Oh.
okay.
I wrapped my arms around myself. When I walked into the warm office, I almost turned around and walked back. Edward Cullen stood at the desk in front of me. I recognized again that tossed bronze hair. He didn't appear to notice this. I can't even read now.
I know, right?
He seemed to notice the sound of my entrance. I stood pressed against the back wall, waiting for the receptionist to be free. He was arguing with her in a low, attractive voice. I quickly picked up the gist for the argument. He was trying to trade from 6-hour biology to another time, any other time. Oh. I just couldn't believe this was about me. It had to be something else. Something that happened before I entered the biology room. The look on his face must have been about another aggravation entirely. It was impossible that the stranger could take such a sudden, intense dislike to me. I hate her. The door opened again, and the cold wind suddenly gusted through the worm room. What the heck?
Gusted through the worm.
Gusted through the room, rustling the papers on the desk, swirling my hair around my face. The girl who came in merely stepped to the desk, placed a note on the wire basket, and walked out again. But Edward Cullen's back stiffened, and he turned slowly to glare at me. His face was absurdly handsome, with piercing, hate-filling eyes. For an instant, I felt a thrill of genuine fear, raising the hair on my arms. The look only lasted a second, but it chilled me more than the freezing wind. He turned back to the receptionist. Never mind
No,
that.
I got
Oh yeah.
Never mind then.
He said hastily in a voice like velvet.
No. I can see that's impossible. Thank you so much for your help.
And he turned on his heel without another look at me and disappeared out the door. I went meekly to the desk, my face white for once instead of red, and handed her the signed slip.
How did your first day go, dear?
The receptionist asked maternally.
Fine.
I lied, my voice weak. She didn't look convinced. When I got to the truck, it was almost the last car in the lot. It seemed like a haven, already the closest thing to home I had in the stamp green hole. Okay. I sat inside for a while, just staring out the windshield blankly, but soon I was cold enough to need the heater, so I turned the key and the engine roared to life. I headed back to Charlie's house, fighting tears the whole way there.
Oh,
okay, I'm done.
much. End of chapter 1. Testing.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Hello. Okay. Don't put that.
Chapter 2. Open book. The next day was better and worse. It was better because it wasn't raining yet, though the clouds were dense and opaque. It was easier because I knew exactly what to expect of my day. Mike came to sit by me in English and walked me to my next class, with Chess Club Eric glaring at him all the while. That was flattering. People didn't look at me quite as much as they had yesterday. I sat with a big group at lunch that included Mike, Eric, Jessica, and several other people whose names and faces I now remembered. I began to feel like I was treading water instead of drowning in it. It was worse because I was tired. I still couldn't sleep with the wind echoing around the house. It was worse because Mr. Varner called me on me and Trig when my hand wasn't raised and I had the wrong answer. Okay. It was miserable because I had to play volleyball. And the one time I didn't cringe out of the way of the ball, I hit my teammate in the head with it. And it was worse because Edward Cullen wasn't in school at all. All morning I was dreading lunch, fearing his bizarre glares. Part of me wanted to confront him and demand to know what his problem was. While I was lying sleepless in my bed, I even imagined what I would say, but I knew myself too well to think I would really have the guts to do it. I made the cowardly lion look like the Terminator. But I walked into the cafeteria with Jessica, trying to keep my eyes from sweeping the place for him and failing entirely. Did they leave?
Yeah.
I saw that his 4 siblings of sorts were sitting together at the same table, and he was not with them. Mike intercepted us and steered us to his table. Jessica seemed elated by the attention, and her friends quickly joined us, but as I tried to listen to their easy chatter, I was terribly uncomfortable, waiting nervously for the moment he would arrive. I hoped that he would simply ignore me when he came, and prove my suspicions false. He didn't come, and as time passed, I grew more and more tense. I walked to biology with more confidence when, by the end of lunch, he still hadn't showed. Mike, who was taking on the qualities of a golden retriever, walked faithfully by my side to class. I held my breath at the door, but Edward Cullen wasn't there either. I exhaled and went to my seat. Mike followed, talking about an upcoming trip to the beach. He lingered by my desk till the bell rang, then he smiled at me wistfully and went to sit by a girl with braces and a bad perm. It looked like I was going to have to do something about Mike, and it wouldn't be easy. In a town like this, where everyone lived on top of everyone else, diplomacy was essential. I had never been enormously tactful. I had no precise practice dealing with overly friendly boys. It's because everyone is mean to her because she sucks. I was relieved that I had the desk to myself and that Edward was absent. I told myself that repeatedly, but I couldn't get rid of the nagging suspicion that I was the reason he wasn't there. It was ridiculous and egotistical to think that I could affect anyone so strongly. It was impossible, and yet I couldn't stop worrying that it was true. When the school day was finally done and the blush was fading out of my cheeks from the volleyball incident, I changed quickly back into my jeans and navy blue sweater. I hurried from the girls' locker room, pleased to find that I had successfully evaded my retriever friend for the moment. I walked swiftly out to the parking lot. It was crowded now with fleeing students. I got in my truck and dug through my bag to make sure I had what I needed. Last night I discovered that Charlie couldn't cook much besides fried eggs and bacon. So I requested that I be assigned kitchen detail for my duration of my stay. He was willing enough to hand over the keys to the banquet hall. I also found that he had no food in the house, so I had my shopping list and the cash from the jar in the cupboard labeled food money, and I was on my way to the Thriftway. I gunned my deafening engine to life, ignoring the heads that turned in my direction, and backed carefully into a place in the line of cars that were waiting to exit the parking lot. As I waited, trying to pretend that the ear-splitting rumble was coming from someone else's car, I saw the two Cullens and the Hale twins getting into their car. It was a shiny new Volvo, of course. I hadn't noticed their clothes before. I'd been too mesmerized by their faces. Now that I looked, it was obvious that they were all dressed exceptionally well, simply but in clothes that subtly hinted at designer origins. With their remarkable good looks, the style with which they carried themselves, they could have worn dish rags and pulled it off. It seemed excessive for them to have both looks and money, but as far as I could tell, life worked that way most of the time. It didn't look as if it bought them any acceptance here. No, I didn't fully believe that. The isolation must be their desire. I couldn't imagine any door that wouldn't be opened by that degree of beauty. They looked at my noisy truck as I passed them, just like everyone else. I kept my eyes straight forward and was relieved when I finally was free of school grounds. The Thriftway was not far from the school, just a few streets south off the highway. It was nice to be inside the supermarket. It felt normal. I did the shopping at home, and I fell into the pattern of the familiar task gladly. The store was big enough inside that I couldn't hear the tapping of the rain on the roof to remind me where I was. When I got home, I unloaded all the groceries, stuffing them in wherever I could find an open space. I hoped Charlie wouldn't mind. I wrapped potatoes in foil and stuck them in the oven to bake, covered a steak in marinade, and balanced it on top of a carton of eggs in the fridge. When I was finished with that, I took my book bag upstairs. Before starting my homework, I changed into a pair of dry sweats, pulled my damp hair up into a ponytail, and checked my email for the first time. I had 3 messages.
Bella,
My mom wrote,
write me as soon as you get in. Tell me about how your night was. Is it
Wait.
raining? I miss you already. I'm almost finished packing for Florida, but I can't find my pink blouse. Do you know where I put it? Phil says hi, Mom.
I sighed and went to the next. It was sent 8 hours after the first.
Bella,
She wrote,
why haven't you emailed me yet? What are you waiting for? Mom.
that the last was from this morning.
Isabella, if I haven't heard from you by 5:30 p.m. today, I'm calling Charlie.
I checked the clock. I still had an hour, but my mom was well known for jumping the gun.
Mom, calm down. I'm writing right now. Mom, calm down. I'm writing right now. Don't do anything rash. Bella.
I sent that. It began writing again.
Mom, everything is great. Of course it's raining. I was waiting for something to write about. School isn't bad, just a little repetitive. I met some nice kids who sit by me by lunch. Your blouse is at the dry cleaners. You were supposed to pick it up Friday. Charlie bought me a truck. Can you believe it? I love it. It's old, but really sturdy, which is good, for me. I miss you, too. I'll write again soon, but I'm not going to check my email every 5 minutes. Relax. Breathe. I love you, Bella.
I had decided to read Wuthering Heights, the novel we were currently studying in English, yet again for the fun of it. That's what I was doing when Charlie came home. I lost track of time and I hurried downstairs to take the potatoes and put the steak into broil.
Bella?
My father called out when he heard me on the stairs. Who else, I thought to myself.
Hey, Dad. Welcome home.
Thanks.
He hung up his gun belt and stepped out of his boots as I bustled about the kitchen. As far as I was aware, he had never shot the gun on the job, but he kept it ready. When I came here as a child, he would always remove the bullets as soon as he walked in the door. I guess he considered me old enough now not to shoot myself by accident, and not depressed enough to shoot myself on purpose.
What's for dinner?
He asked warily. My mother was an imaginative cook, and her experiments weren't always edible. I was surprised and sad that he seemed to remember that far back.
Steak and potatoes.
I think you have to be a little louder.
Steak and potatoes.
I answered, and he looked relieved. He seemed to feel awkward standing in the kitchen doing nothing. He lumbered into the living room to watch TV while I worked. We were both more comfortable that way. I made salad while the steaks cooked and set the table. I called him in when dinner was ready, and he sniffed appreciatively as he walked into the room.
Smells good. Belle?
Thanks.
We ate in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't uncomfortable. Neither of us was bothered by the quiet. It's supposed to be were, but whatever. In some ways, we were well suited for living together.
So, how did you like the school? Have you made any friends?
He asked while I was taking seconds.
Well, I have a few classes with a girl named Jessica. I sit with her friends at lunch, and there's this boy, Mike, who's very friendly. Everybody seems pretty nice.
With one outstanding exception.
That must be Mike Newton. Nice kid, nice family. His dad owns a spotting.
What?
Oh, his dad owns a sporting goods store just outside.
I can't see.
Just outside of the town. He makes a good living off of all the backpackers who come through here.
Do you know the Cullen family?
I asked hesitantly.
Dr. Cullen's family? Sure. Dr. Cullen's a great man.
They... Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the...
They...
Who's that?
Bella.
They, the kids are a little different. They don't seem to fit in very well at school.
Charlie surprised me by looking angry.
People in this town.
He muttered.
Dr. Cullen is a brilliant surgeon who could probably work in every hospital in the world. Make 10 times the salary he gets here.
He continued, getting louder.
We're lucky to have it.
I need my glasses.
What?
I can't see.
Okay, one moment.
We're lucky to have him. Lucky that his wife wanted to live in a small town. He's an asset to the community, and all those kids are well behaved and polite. I had my doubts when they first moved. And with all those adopted teenagers, I thought we might have some problems with them, but they're all very mature. I haven't had one speck of trouble from any of them. That's more than I can say for the children of some folks who have lived in this town for generations. And they stick together the way a family should. Camping trips every other weekend. Just because they're newcomers, people have to talk.
It was the longest speech I'd ever heard Charlie make. He must feel strongly about whatever people were saying. I backpedaled.
They seem nice enough to me. I just noticed they kept to themselves. They're all very attractive.
I added, trying to be more complimentary.
You should see the doctor. Ah!
Charlie said, laughing.
It's a good thing he's happily... Wait, is that
That's still Charlie.
It's a good thing he's happily married. A lot of the nurses at the hospital have a hard time concentrating on their work with him around.
We lapsed back into silence and finished eating. He cleared the table while I started on the dishes. He went back to the TV, and after I finished washing the dishes by hand, no dishwasher. I thought it said dishwater. I was like, That's disgusting. I went upstairs unwillingly to work on math homework. I could feel a tradition in the making. That night it was finally quiet. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted. The rest of the week was uneventful. I got used to the routine of my classes. By Friday, I was able to recognize, if not name, almost all the students at school. In gym, the kids on my team learned not to pass the ball and to step quickly in front of me if the other team tried to take advantage of my weakness. I happily stayed out of their way. Edward Cullen didn't come back to school. Every day I watched anxiously until the rest of the Cullens entered the cafeteria without him. Then I could relax and join the lunchtime conversation. Why isn't he going to school? He's stupid.
because he's a vampire.
I don't care. All the other vampires are going
He's
to
gonna
school.
fall in love with her. He knows it.
Where was I? Mostly it's centered around the trip to La Push Ocean Park in 2 weeks that Mike was putting together. I was invited and I had agreed to go. More out of politeness than desire. Beaches should be hot and dry.
Okay.
By Friday, I was perfectly comfortable entering my biology class, no longer worried that Edward would be there. For all I knew, he had dropped out of school. I tried not to think about him, but I couldn't totally suppress the worry that I was responsible for his continued absence, ridiculous as it seemed. Alright, I just want to make sure it was that microphone. Look at how, small the thing is. It's all the way up.
Put it close.
Edward.
Where was I?
I don't know.
Okay, back up. My first weekend in Forks passed without incident. Charlie, unused to spending time in the usually empty house, worked most of the weekend. I cleaned the house, got ahead of my homework, and wrote my mom more bogusly cheerful email. Because it's that much of a chore for her to write to her mother. I did drive to the library Saturday, but it was so poorly stocked that I didn't bother to get a card. I would have to make a date to visit Olympia or Seattle soon and find a good bookstore. I wondered idly what kind of gas mileage the truck got and shuddered at the thought. The rain stayed soft over the weekend, quiet, so I was able to sleep well. People greeted me in the parking lot Monday morning. I didn't know all their names, but I waved back and smiled at everyone. It was colder this morning, but happily not. I don't care about any of this. In English, Mike took his accustomed seat by my side. We had another pop quiz on Wuthering Heights, blah, 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 blah. Let's skip to the interesting part. Wow, Mike said, it's snowing. Ew, snow. Oh, yeah. Say ew.
Ew.
Snow. There went my good day. Because there's 2 snowflakes. He looked surprised.
No. Oh. Don't you like snow? No!
That means... No, it's not. It's not it.
That means it's too cold for rain.
Obviously.
Besides, I thought it was supposed to come down in flakes. You know, each one unique and all that. Those just look like the ends of Q-tips.
Haven't you ever seen snowfall before?
He asked. Incredulously.
Sure I have.
I paused.
On TV.
Michael laughed, and then a big, squishy ball of dripping snow smacked into the back of his head. We both turned to see where it came from. I had my suspicions about Eric, who's walking away, his back towards us, in the wrong direction for his next class. Mike apparently had the same notion. He bent over and began scraping together a pile of wet mush. We'll see you at lunch, okay? I kept walking as he spoke. I forgot.
Once people start throwing wet stuff, I go inside.
He just nodded. His eyes. What kind of human sentence is that?
I don't know.
Once people start
Throwing wet stuff.
Okay. Throughout the morning, everyone chattered excitedly about the snow. Apparently, this is also boring.
Should we just read the... Wait, no, because
Mike, Clara, and Jessica were talking to me about the snow fight. Glanced toward the... And then I froze where I stood. There were 5 people at the table. Jessica pulled on my arm.
Hello? Bella. What do you want?
I looked down. My ears were hot. I had no reason to feel self-conscious. I reminded myself. I hadn't done anything wrong.
What's wrong with Bella?
Mike asked Jessica.
Nothing!
I answered.
I'll just get a soda today.
I caught up to the end of line.
Aren't you hungry?
Jessica asked.
Actually, I feel a little sick.
I said, my eyes still on the floor. I waited for them to get their food and then followed them to a table, my eyes on my feet. I sipped my soda slowly, my stomach churning. Twice Mike asked with unnecessary concern how I was feeling. I told him it was nothing, but I was wondering if I should play it up to escape to the nurse's office for the next hour. Ridiculous! I shouldn't have to run away. I decided to permit myself one glance at the Cullen family's table. If he was glaring at me, I would skip biology like the coward I was. I kept my head down and glanced up under my lashes. None of them were looking this way. I lifted my head a little. They were laughing. Edward, Jasper, and Emmett all had their hair entirely saturated with melting snow. Alice and Rosalie were leaning away as Emmett shook his dripping hair toward them. Ew, I guess he's a dog now. They were enjoying the snowy day just like everyone else, only they looked more like a scene from a movie than the rest of us. But aside from the laughter and playfulness, there was something different. I couldn't quite pinpoint what the difference was. I examined Edward the most carefully. His skin was less pale, I decided, flushed from the snow fight. Oh, he went hunting. I'm stupid. That's why he was out for a full, straight-up week, because he was like, I need to find some rats to drain, because I'm a disgusting vampire. He left from the snowbank. The circles under his eyes much less noticeable. But there's something more. I pondered, staring, trying to isolate the change.
Bella, what are you staring at?
Jessica intruded, her eyes following my stare. At that precise moment, his eyes flashed over to meet mine. I dropped my head, letting my hair fall to conceal my face. I was sure, though, in the instant our eyes met, that he didn't look harsh or unfriendly as he had the last time I'd seen him. He looked merely curious again, unsatisfied in some way.
Edward Cullen is staring at you.
Jessica giggled in my ear.
He doesn't look... Wait.
Doesn't look angry,
does he?
I couldn't help asking.
No.
She said, sounding confused by the question.
Should he be? I don't think he likes me.
I confided. I still felt queasy. I put my head down on my arm.
The Cullens don't like anybody. Well, they don't notice anybody enough to like them, but he's still staring at you. Stop looking at him!
I hissed. Man, I would be so freaked out if there's just some kids staring at me all lunch long. She snickered, but she looked away. I raised my head enough to make sure that she did, contemplating violence if she resisted.
What?
Mike interrupted us then. He was planning on an epic battle of Blizzard in the parking lot after school and wanted us to join. Jessica agreed enthusiastically. Alright, let's ignore this. I decided to honor the bargain I made with myself. Since he didn't look angry, I would go to biology. My stomach did frightened little flips at the thought of sitting next to him again. I didn't really want to walk with class with Mike as usual. He seemed to be a popular target for the snowball snipers. But when we went to the door, everyone besides me groaned in unison. It was raining, washing all traces of snow away in clear icy ribbons down the side of the walkway. I pulled my hood up secretly, pleased. I would be free to go straight home after gym. Mike kept up a string of compliments on the way to building
Complaints.
4. Oh, complaints. Oh, that's the opposite of compliments.
Yeah, that's why I corrected you.
Whatever. Once inside the...
I can't see.
There's no quotes.
I can't see. Well, I still need to see.
It just says hello. Once inside the classroom, I saw with relief that my table was still empty. Mr. Banner was walking around the room, distributing one microscope and a box of slides to each table. Class didn't start for a few minutes, and the room buzzed with conversation. I kept my eyes away from the door, doodling idly on the cover of my notebook. I heard very clearly when the chair next to me moved, but my eyes stayed carefully focused on the pattern I was drawing.
Hello?
Said a quiet musical voice.
I did that on purpose, by the way.
Imagine if, like, the story actually did start and he, like, said it like that. I looked up, stunned that he was speaking to me. He was sitting as far away from me as the desk allowed, but his chair was angled toward me. His hair was dripping wet, disheveled. Even so, he looked like he'd just finished shooting a commercial for hair gel. His dazzling face was friendly, open. No.
It's going to the microphone.
A slight smile on his flawless lips, but his eyes were careful.
My name is Edward Collins.
He continued.
I didn't have a chance to introduce myself last week. You must be Bella Swan.
My mind was spinning with confusion. Had I made up the whole thing? He was perfectly polite now. I had to speak. He was waiting, but I couldn't think of anything conventional to say.
How do you know my name?
I stammered. He laughed a soft, enchanting laugh.
Oh, I think everyone knows your name. The whole town has been waiting for you to arrive.
I grimaced. I knew it was something like that.
No.
I persisted stupidly.
I mean, why did you call me Bella?
He seemed confused.
Do you prefer Isabella? No, I like Bella.
I said.
But I think my dad must call me Isabella behind my back. That's what everyone here seems to know me as.
I tried to explain, feeling like an utter moron.
Oh.
He let it drop. I looked away awkwardly.
He let it drop.
Thankfully, Mr. Banner started class at that moment. I tried to concentrate as he explained the lab we would be doing today. The slides in the box were out of order. Working as lab partners, we had to separate the slides of onion root tip cells into the... I don't care about this. Get started, he commanded. Oh, right.
Get started,
He commanded.
Ladies first.
Partner?
Edward asked. I looked up to see him smiling a crooked smile so beautiful that I could only stare at him like an idiot.
Or I could start.
Wait, who's that?
I think it's... I don't know.
Or I could start if you wish.
The smile faded. He was obviously wondering if I was mentally competent.
No, he wasn't.
Oh,
No!
I said, flushing.
I'll go ahead.
I was showing off, just a little. I'd already done this lab and I knew what I was looking for. It should be easy. I snapped the first slide into place under the microscope and adjusted it quickly to the 40 times objective. I studied the slide briefly. My assessment was confident.
Profane! Do you mind if I look?
He asked as I began to remove the slide. His hand caught mine to stop me as he asked. His fingers were ice cold, like he'd been holding them. His fingies were ice cold, like he'd been holding them in a snowdrift before class. But that wasn't why I jerked my hand away so quickly. When he touched me, it stung my hand as if an electric current had passed through us.
I'm sorry,
he muttered, pulling his hand back immediately. However, he continued to reach for the microscope. I watched him, still staggered, as he examined the slide for an even shorter time than I had.
Profane!
He agreed, writing it neatly in the first space on our worksheet. He swiftly switched out the first slide for a second, and then glanced at it curiously. He murmured, writing it down as he spoke. I kept my voice indifferent.
May I?
He smirked and pushed the microscope to me. I looked through the piece eagerly, only to be disappointed. Dang it, he was right.
Slide 3!
Hey, be careful about your audio.
Oh, yeah.
Slide 3!
That's better. I held out my hand without looking at him. He handed it to me. It seemed like he was being careful not to touch my skin again. I took the most fleeting look I could manage.
Interface!
I passed him the microphone before he could ask for it. He took a swift peek and then wrote it down. I would have written it while he looked, but his clear, elegant script intimidating me. Oh, yeah, it's almost like he's had 150 years to practice handwriting because he's an old fart.
Actually, I think he just wants to eat her.
Yeah, he's like...
You look like tasty blood.
I didn't want to spoil the page with my clumsy scrawl.
What?
Or handwriting. When we...
Yeah, but why would you...
I don't know, because he's just so beautiful and perfect in every way.
No, but why'd you use those words? Clumsy...
Because she's an edgy teenager who has problems. We were finished before anyone else was close. I could see Mike and his partner comparing two slides again and again, and another group had their book open under the table, which left me with nothing to do but try not to look at him. Unsuccessfully. I glanced up, and he was staring at me, the same, I know, inexplicable look of frustration in his eyes. Suddenly, I identified the subtle difference in his face. Did you get contacts? I blurted out unthinkingly. He seemed puzzled by the unexpected question.
No.
Oh, I mumbled. I thought there was something different. Oh, that's you.
I thought there was something different about your eyes.
He shrugged and looked away. In fact, I was sure there was something different. I vividly remembered the flat black color of his eyes the last time he glared at me. The color was striking against the background of his pale skin and his auburn hair. Today, his eyes were a completely different color, a strange ochre? Ochre? I don't know what that says. Darker than butterscotch, but with the same golden tone. I didn't understand how that could be unless he was lying for some reason about the contacts. Or maybe Forks was making me crazy in the literal sense of the word. I looked down. His hands were clenched into hard fists again.
Mr. Banner? First of all, why?
Mr. Banner came to our table again to see why we weren't working. He looked over our shoulders to glance at the completed lab, and then stared more intently to check the answers.
So, Edward, didn't you think Isabella should get a chance with the microscope?
Mr. Banner asked. Wow, I said that with a weird accent. Mr. Banner asked.
Bella.
Edward corrected automatically.
Actually, she identified 3 of the 5.
Mr. Banner looked at me now. His expression was skeptical.
Have you done the lab before?
He asked. I smiled sheepishly.
Not with onion root. Whitefish blastula?
What?
Yeah!
Mr. Banner nodded.
Moving. Were you in an advanced placement program in Phoenix? Yes! Well,
He said after a moment.
I guess it's good you two are lab partners.
He mumbled something else as he walked away. After he left, I began doodling on my notebook again.
It's too bad about the snow, isn't it?
Edward asked. I had the feeling that he was forcing himself to make small talk with me. Paranoia swept over me again. Hold on, what does that mean, though?
Whitefish blastula.
What is whitefish blastula?
I don't know.
Make small talk with me. Paranoia was like it's like he had heard my conversation with Jessica at lunch and was trying to prove me wrong.
Not really.
I answered honestly instead of pretending to be normal like everyone else. I was still trying to dislodge the stupid feeling of suspicion, and I couldn't concentrate.
You don't like it cold.
It wasn't a question.
Or the wet.
Or the wet.
Forks must be a difficult place for you to live.
He mused.
You have no idea.
I muttered darkly. He looked fascinated by what I said. For some reason I couldn't imagine. His face was such a distraction that I tried not to look at it any more than courtesy absolutely demanded.
Why did you come here then?
No one had asked me that, not straight out like he did. Demanding.
It's complicated. I think I can keep up.
He pressed. I paused for a long moment and then made the mistake of meeting his gaze. His dark gold eyes confused me, and I answered without thinking.
My mother got remarried.
I said, why you... I don't know.
That doesn't sound too complex.
He disagreed, but he was suddenly sympathetic.
When did that happen? Last September.
My voice sounded sad even to me.
And you don't like him?
Edward surmised, his tone still kind.
No. Phil is fine. Too young, maybe. But nice enough. Why did you stay with them?
I couldn't fathom his interest, but he continued to stare at me. You know, I would not trust this guy. When he kept staring at me with penetrating eyes, as if my dull life story was somehow vitally important.
Phil travels a lot. He plays ball for a living.
I half smiled.
Have I heard of him?
He asked, smiling in response.
Probably not. He doesn't play well. Strictly minor league. He moves around a lot. And your mother sent you here so that she could travel with him?
He said it as an assumption again, not a question. My chin raised a fraction.
No! She did not send me here. I sent myself.
His eyebrows knit together.
I don't understand,
He admitted, and he seemed unnecessarily frustrated by that fact. I sighed. Why was I explaining this to him? He continued to stare at me with obvious curiosity.
She stayed with me at first, but she missed him. Made her unhappy. So I decided it was time to spend some quality time with Charlie.
My voice was glum by the time I finished.
But now you're unhappy.
He pointed out.
And
I challenged.
That doesn't seem fair.
He shrugged, but his eyes were still intense. I laughed without humor.
Hasn't anyone ever told you life isn't fair? I believe I have heard that somewhere before.
He agreed dryly.
So that's all?
I insisted, wondering why he was still staring at me that way. His gaze became appraising.
You put on a good show,
He said slowly.
but I'd be willing to bet that you're suffering more than you let anyone see.
I grimaced at him, resisting the impulse to stick out my tongue like a 5-year-old and looked away.
Am I wrong?
I tried to ignore him.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
He murmured smugly.
Why does it matter to you?
I asked, irritated. I kept my eyes away, watching the teacher make his rounds.
That's a very good question.
He muttered so quietly that I wondered if he was talking to himself. However, after a few seconds of silence, I decided that was the only answer I was going to get. I sighed, scowling at the blackboard.
Am I amusing you?
No, it's not. No, this doesn't say
Oh, am I annoying you?
He asked. He sounded amused.
So that's why.
I know. I glanced at him without thinking and told the truth again.
Not exactly. I'm more annoyed at myself. My face is so easy to read. My mother always calls me her open book.
I frowned.
On the contrary, I found you very difficult to read.
Despite everything that I had said and he'd guessed, he sounded like he meant it.
You must be a good reader then.
I replied.
Usually.
He smiled widely, flashing a set of perfect,
Ew.
ultra-white teeth. Mr. Banner called the class to order then, and I returned with relief to listen. I was in disbelief that I had just explained my dreary life to the bizarre, beautiful boy who may or may not despise me. He'd seemed engrossed in our conversation, but now I could see from the corner of my eye that he was leaning away from me again, his hands gripping the edge of the table with unmistakable tension. She should be freaked out by this guy. I tried to appear attentive as Mr. Banner illustrated, with transparencies on the overhead projector, what I had seen without difficulty through the microscope, but my thoughts were unmanageable. When the bell finally rang, Edward rushed as swiftly and as gracefully from the room as he had last Monday. And like last Monday, I stared at him in amazement. Mike skipped quickly to my side and picked up my books for me. I imagined him with a wagging tail.
What? That was awful, her.
He groaned.
They all look exactly the same. You're lucky you had Cullen for a partner.
I didn't have any trouble with it.
I said, stung by his assumption. I regretted the snub instantly.
I've done the lab before, though.
I added before he could get his feelings hurt.
Cullen seemed friendly enough today.
He commented as we shrugged in into our raincoats. He didn't seem pleased about it.
During the book club
Okay, where
we're
were we?
at, I tried to sound indifferent.
Okay. I tried to sound indifferent.
I wonder what was with him last Monday.
Bella?
That's not even loud.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, whatever.
I couldn't concentrate on Mike's chatter as we walked to gym, and PE didn't do much to hold my attention either. Mike was on my team again. He chivalrously covered my position as well as his own, so wool gathering has only interrupted when it was my turn to serve.
What
My
was
team
that
ducked warily
wool
out of the way
gathering?
every time I was up. The rain was just a mess as I walked to the parking lot, but happier when I was in the dry cab. I got the heater running, for once not caring about the mind-numbing roar of the engine. I unzipped my jacket, put the hood down, and fluffed my damp hair out so the heater could dry it on the way home.
Who does that? Who does that?
I'm just gonna drive like this.
Just dry my hair real quick with this nice hair dryer.
I'm gonna
put
plug
into my
it.
car.
I'm gonna plug in my hair dryer in the car and dry it as I go
My
home.
mom puts her hair in the vents.
I looked around me to make sure it was clear. That's when I noticed the still white figure. Edward Cullen was leaning against the
Dude,
door
he's
of the
creepy.
Volvo. I know, 3 cars down from me and staring intently in my direction. I swiftly look away and threw the truck into reverse, almost hitting a rusty Toyota Corolla in my haste. Lucky for the Toyota, I stomped on the brake in time. It was just the sort of car that my truck would make scrap metal of. I took deep breaths, still looking out the other side of my car, and cautiously pulled out again with greater success. I stared straight ahead as I passed the Volvo, but from a peripheral peak, I would swear I saw him laughing.
Yeah, because he's about to eat you.
Okay. End of chapter 2. Before we start chapter 3, we're going to have a quick spout of commentary
That stinks.
about how creepy this
Dude,
kid
he's like a
is.
stalker.
He's
A stalker.
being very invasive about her life.
He's just staring at her laughing.
Like, sitting by her, like, in class, like, with super tight fists, like he's about to throw fists or, like, punch someone.
Tell me about your life.
And he won't stop staring at her like a freak.
Because he's in love with her. Actually, no. He says he wants to eat her.
Dude, if someone did that to me, I'd be like, get away from me, you freak.
He's a vampire.
Alright.
Have you got memo yet?
Chapter 3. Phenomenon.
What? Just farted.
No, it was you.
No,
When I opened my eyes in the morning, something was different.
What?
I thought you were slapping your stomach. It was the light. It was still the gray-green light of a cloudy day in the forest. But it was clearer somehow. I realized there was no fog veiling my window. I jumped to look outside, then groaned in horror. A fine layer of snow covered the yard. Oh no. Just at the top of my truck. And whitened the road. But that wasn't the worst part. All of the rain from yesterday had frozen solid, coating the needles on the trees in a fantastic, gorgeous patterns, and making the driveway a deadly ice slick. I had enough trouble not falling down when the ground was dry. It might be safer for me to go back to bed now. This is stupid. Blah blah blah. I hate my dad Charlie. Oh my gosh, I feel so embarrassed about Edward. Oh, okay, I'll read this paragraph. I should be avoiding him entirely after my brainless and embarrassing babble yesterday. That's right. And I was suspicious of him. Why should he lie about his eyes? I was still frightened of the hostility I sometimes felt emanating from him, and I was still tongue-tied whenever I pictured his perfect face. I was well aware that my league and his league were spheres that did not touch, so I shouldn't be all that anxious to see him today. It took every ounce of my concentration to make it down the icy brick drive. She's still talking about the driveway.
I don't care about your driveway.
Driving to school, I distracted myself from the fear of falling and my unwanted speculations about Edward Cullen by thinking about Mike and Eric, and the obvious difference in how teenage boys responded to me here. I was sure I looked exactly the same as I had in Phoenix. Maybe it was just that the boys back home had watched me pass slowly through the awkward phases of adolescence. No, it's the dating. It's the dating pool is so much smaller.
This whole book is gonna be her about talking about a driveway.
Oh my gosh, boys are noticing me now. I must be like so sexy. Oh my gosh, this is so awful. Whatever the reason, Mike's puppy dog behavior and Eric's apparent...
I don't calling him a dog. He's wagging his tail. Golden retriever, puppy dog eyes.
And Eric's apparent rivalry with him were disconcerting. I wasn't sure if I didn't prefer being ignored. I wasn't sure if I didn't prefer being ignored.
Wait, what does that even mean?
I don't know. My truck seemed to have no problem with the black ice. I don't care.
I don't care about your truck and advertise on your driveway in the road. It doesn't matter.
I was standing by the corner of the truck struggling to fight back the sudden wave of emotion the snow chains had brought on when I heard an odd sound. It was a high-pitched screech, and it was fast becoming painfully loud. I looked up, startled. I saw several things simultaneously. Nothing was moving in slow motion the way it does in the movies. Instead, the adrenaline rush seemed to make my brain work much faster, and I was able to absorb in clear detail several things at once. Right, she got in like a
car accident or something.
Okay. Is this the scene where he's like, "Bah, my fists are so powerful"? I'm sorry.
Bit in my face.
I'm sorry. Edward Cullen was standing 4 cars down from me, staring at me in horror. His face stood out from the sea of faces, all frozen, the same mask of shock, but more immediately.
This whole page is just about him looking at her.
I was going to hit the back corner. I was going to get in a car crash. Oh no, I didn't even have time to close my eyes. Two long white hands shot out protectively in front of me, and the van shuddered to a stop a foot from my face, the large hands fitting providentially into a deep dent into the side of the van's body. Then his hands moved so fast they blurred. One was suddenly gripping under the body of the van, and something was dragging me, swinging my legs around like a rag dolls till they hit the tire of the tan car. A groaning metallic thud hurt my ears as the van settled, glass popping onto the asphalt exactly where a second ago my legs had been. It was absolutely silent for one long second before the screaming began. In the abrupt bedlam, I could hear more than one person shouting my name. Bella, Bella, ah! But more clearly than all the yelling, I could hear Edward Cullen's low, frantic voice in my ear.
Bella, are you alright?
I'm fine.
My voice sounded strange. I tried to sit up and realized that he was holding me against the side of his body in an iron grasp.
Be careful.
He warned as I struggled.
I think you hit your head pretty hard.
I became aware of a throbbing ache centered above my left ear.
Ow.
I thought surprised. I said surprised.
That's what I thought.
His voice amazingly sounded like he was suppressing laughter.
How in the...
I trailed off, trying to clear my head, get my bearings.
How did you get over here so fast?
I was standing right next to you, Bella.
He said, his tone serious again. I turned to sit up, and this time he let me, releasing his hold around my waist and sliding as far from me as he could in the limited space. I looked at his concerned, innocent expression and was disoriented again by the force of his gold-colored eyes. What was I asking him? And then they found us, a crowd of people with tears streaming down their faces, shouting at each other, shouting at us.
Don't move!
Someone instructed.
Get Tyler out of the van!
Someone else shouted. There was a flurry of activity around us. I tried to get up, but Edward's cold hand pushed my shoulder down.
Just stay put for now.
But I'm cold!
I complained. It surprised me when he chuckled under his breath. There was an edge to his sound.
You were over...
Oh. You were over there!
I suddenly remembered, and his chuckle stopped short.
You were...
Oh. You were by your car.
His expression turned hard.
No, I wasn't.
I saw you.
All around us was chaos. I could hear the gruff voices of adults arriving on the scene. But I obstinately held on to our argument. I was right, and he was going to admit it.
Bella! I was standing with you, and I pulled you out of the way.
He unleashed the full, devastating power of his eyes on me, as if trying to communicate something crucial.
No!
I set my jaw. The gold in his eyes blazed.
Please! Bella!
Why?
I demanded.
Trust me!
He pleaded, his soft voice overwhelming. I could hear the sirens now.
Will you promise to explain everything to me later?
Fine!
He snapped, abruptly exasperated.
Fine.
I repeated angrily. It took six EMTs and 2 teachers, Mr. Varner and Coach Clapp, to ship the van far enough.
Like, because he's like a gym coach, like when he runs, like clap, like his
Bella!
butt cheeks. Clap. Because he's a gym teacher. So, like,
All right, that's enough from you.
yeah. Isn't
Edward,
that funny, Mother?
Stop. Edward
She's probably laughing right now.
No, she's not. Refused his, and I tried to do the same. But the traitor told them I'd hit my head. The traitor? What?
Read faster.
And I probably had a concussion. I almost died of humiliation when they put on the neck brace. It looked like the entire school was there watching soberly as they loaded me into the back of the ambulance. Edward got to ride in the front. It was maddening. To make matters worse, Chief Swan arrived before they could get me away safely.
Bella.
He yelled in a panic when he recognized me on the stretcher.
I'm completely fine. Dad.
I sighed.
There's nothing wrong with me.
He turned to the closest EMT for a second opinion. I turned I tuned him out to consider the jumble of inexplicable images churning chaotically in my head. When they'd lifted me away from the car, I had seen the deep dent in the tan car's bumper, a very distinct dent that fit the contours of Edward's shoulders, as if he had braced himself against the car with enough force to damage the metal frame, because he's super strong like a sexy vampire.
She's like,
What happened?
oh my goodness.
It's like there's a Edward-shaped dent in the car.
I hate this book. Hey, how do you like this book? Tell me.
Stop. And then there was his... Yeah, I don't know who that is. And then there was his family. Looking on... Bella, stop. Looking on from the distance with expressions that ranged from disapproval to fury, but held no hint of concern for their brother's safety. I tried to think of a logical solution that could explain what I had just seen, a solution that excluded the assumption that I was insane. Naturally, the ambulance got a police escort to the county hospital. I felt ridiculous the whole time they were unloading me. What made it worse was that Edward simply glided through the hospital door under his own power. I ground my teeth together. They put me in the emergency room, a long room with a line of beds separated by pastel patterned curtains. A nurse put a pressure cuff on my arm and a thermometer under my... You know what? I can't read. I'm like so bad at reading right now. She's in the hospital. Tyler Crowley. I'm so sorry. Okay, go. This is Tyler.
Who's Tyler?
Tyler Crowley, the guy who almost ran her over.
Bella, I'm so sorry. It's fine, Tyler. You look awful. Are you alright?
As we spoke, nurses began unwinding his soiled bandages, exposing a myriad of shallow slices all over his forehead and left cheek. He ignored me.
I thought I was gonna cut you.
Just keep reading.
Oh, I was going too fast and I hit the ice wrong.
He winced as one nurse started dabbing at his face.
Don't worry about it. You missed me. How did you get out of the way so fast? You were there, and then you were gone. Edward pulled me out of the way.
He looked confused.
Who? Edward Cullen. He was standing next to me.
I'd always been a terrible liar. I didn't sound convincing at all.
Cullen? I didn't see him. Wow. He was all so fast, I guess. Is he okay? I think so. He's here somewhere. But they didn't make him use a stretcher.
I knew I wasn't crazy. What had happened? There was no way to explain what I'd seen. They wheeled me away then to x-ray my head. I told them that there was nothing and I was right. Oh, there's nothing wrong. And I was right. Not even a concussion. I asked if I could leave, but the nurse said I had to talk to a doctor first. So I was taped. I was trapped.
Taped.
And they are waiting. Harassed by Tyler's constant apologies and promises to make it up to me. No matter how many times I tried to convince him I was fine, he continued to torment himself. Finally, I closed my eyes and ignored him. He kept up a remorseful mumbling.
Is she sleeping?
A musical voice asked. My eyes flew open. Oh, that's me. Edward was standing at the foot of my bed, smirking. I glared at him. It wasn't easy. It would have been more natural to ogle.
Hey, Edward, I'm really sorry.
Tyler began. Edward lifted his hand to stop him.
No blood, no foul,
he said, flashing his brilliant teeth. He moved to sit on the edge of Tyler's bed, facing me. He smirked again.
So,
what's the verdict?
He asked me.
There's nothing wrong with me at all, but they won't let me go.
I complained.
How come you weren't strapped to a gurney like the rest of us?
It's all about who you know,
he answered.
But don't worry, I came to spring you.
Who says that?
Then a doctor walked around the corner.
You always yell at me. You have to restart.
and my mouth fell open. No, I don't.
It's so loud.
He was young. He was blonde, and he was handsomer than any movie star I'd seen. He was pale, though, and tired-looking with circles under his eyes. From Charlie's description, this had to be Edward's father.
Say, Miss Swan,
Dr. Cullen said in a remarkably appealing voice.
how are you feeling?
I'm fine.
I said for the last time, I hoped. He walked to the light board on the wall over my head and turned it on.
Your x-rays look good,
He said.
Does your head hurt? Edward said you hit it pretty hard.
I'm fine!
I repeated with a sigh, throwing a quick scowl towards Edward. Where was I?
The doctor.
The doctor's cool fingers probed lightly along my skull. He noticed when I winced.
Tender?
He asked.
Not really.
I'd had worse. I heard a chuckle and looked over to see Edward's patronizing smile. My eyes narrowed.
Well, your father is in the waiting room. You can go home with him now, but come back if you feel dizzy or have trouble with your eyesight at all. Can't I go back to school?
I asked, imagining Charlie trying to be attentive.
Maybe you should take it easy today.
I glanced at Edward.
Does he get to go back to school?
Someone has
Someone has to spread the good news that we survived. Oh, someone has to spread the good news that we survived.
Edward said smugly.
Actually,
Dr. Cullen corrected.
most of the school seems to be in the waiting room.
Oh no!
I moaned, covering my face with my hands. Dr. Cullen raised his eyebrows. I know.
Do you want to stay?
No! No!
I insisted, throwing my legs over the side of the bed and hopping down quickly. Too quickly. I staggered and Dr. Cullen caught me. He looked concerned.
I'm fine!
I assured him again. No need to tell him my balance problems had nothing to do with hitting my head.
Take some Tylenol for the pain.
He suggested as he steadied me.
It doesn't hurt that bad!
I insisted.
It sounds like you were extremely lucky.
Dr. Cullen said, smiling as he signed my chart with a flourish.
Lucky Edward happened to be standing next to me.
I amended with a hard glance at the subject of my statement.
Oh, well, yes.
Dr. Cullen agreed, suddenly occupied with the papers in front of him. Then he looked away at Tyler and walked next to the bed. My intuition flickered. The doctor was in on it.
I'm afraid that you'll have to stay with us just a little bit longer.
That's italicized. I'm afraid that you'll have to.
I'm afraid that you'll have to stay with us just a little bit longer.
He said to Tyler and began checking his cuts. As soon as the doctor's back was turned, I moved to Edward's side.
Can I talk to you for a minute? That's you.
Yeah, that you didn't hiss that under your breath.
I went, can I talk to you for a minute?
I hissed under my breath. He took a step back from me. His jaw suddenly clenched.
Your father is waiting for you.
He said through his teeth.
Shh.
I glanced at Dr. Cullen and Tyler.
I'd like to speak with you alone, if you don't mind.
I pressed. He glared and then turned his back and strode down the long room.
Look up, I can't
I
see.
nearly had to run to keep up. As soon as we turned the corner into a short hallway, he spun around to face me.
What do you want?
He asked, sounding annoyed. His eyes were cold. His unfriendliness intimidated me. My words came out with less severity than I had intended.
You owe me an explanation!
I reminded him.
I saved your life. I don't owe you anything.
I flinched back from the resentment in his voice.
You promised.
That's...
Oh, you promised.
Bella, you hit your head. You don't know what you're talking about.
His voice was cutting. My temper flared now. I glared defiantly at him.
There's nothing wrong with my head.
He glared back.
What do you want from me, Bella?
I want to know the truth!
I said.
I want to know why I'm lying for you!
What do you think happened?
He snapped. It came out in a rush.
All I know is that you weren't anywhere near me! Tyler didn't see you either, so don't tell me I hit my head too hard. That van was going to crush us both! And it didn't! And your hands left dents in the side of it! And you left a dent in the other car, and you're not hurt at all! And the van should have smashed my legs, but you were holding it up! I could hear how crazy it sounded. Oh.
I don't even know
I hear-
I could hear how crazy it sounded, and I couldn't continue. I was so mad, I could feel the tears coming. I tried to force them back by grinding my teeth together. He was staring at me incredulously, but his face was tense, defensive.
You think I lifted a van off you?
His tone questioned my sanity. Don't yawn, idiot. But it only made me more suspicious. It was like a perfectly delivered line by a skilled actor. I merely nodded once, jaw tight.
Nobody would believe that you know.
His voice held an edge of derision now.
I'm not going to tell anybody.
I said Etord slowly, carefully controlling my anger. Surprise flitted across his face.
Then why does it matter?
It matters to me.
I insisted.
I don't like to lie, so there'd better be a good reason why I'm doing it.
Can't you just thank me and get it over with?
Thank you.
I waited, fuming and expectant.
You're not going to let it go, are you?
No!
Fella, look. Look at the... Did you see? Did you see?
It's okay.
In that case...
That's
It's funny.
In that case, I hope you enjoy disappointment.
We scowled at each other in silence. I was the first to speak, trying to keep myself focused. I was in danger of being distracted by his livid, gorgeous face. It was like trying to stare down a destroying angel.
Why did you even bother?
I asked frigidly. He paused, and for a brief moment his stunning face was unexpectedly vulnerable.
I don't know.
He whispered, and then he turned his back on me and walked away. I was so hungry, it took me a few minutes. I was so angry, it took me a few minutes until I could move. When I could talk, I made my way slowly to the exit at the end of the hallway. The waiting room was more unpleasant than I'd feared. It seemed like every face I knew in Forks was there, staring at me. Charlie rushed to my side. I put up my hands.
There's nothing wrong with me!
I assured him sullenly. I was still aggravated, not in the mood for chit-chat.
What did the doctor say?
Dr. Cullen saw me, and he said I was fine and I could go home.
I sighed. Mike and Jessica and Eric were all there, beginning to converge on us.
Let's go!
I urged. Charlie put one arm behind my back, not quite touching me, and led me to the glass doors of the exit. I waved sheepishly at my friends, hoping to convey that they didn't need to worry anymore. It was a huge relief, the first time I'd ever felt that way, to get in the cruiser. We drove in silence. I was so wrapped up in my thoughts that I barely knew Charlie was there. I think Wesley wants to get out. I was positive that Edward's defensive behavior in the hall was a confirmation of the bizarre things I could hardly believe I'd witnessed. When we got to the house, Charlie finally spoke.
You'll need to call Renee.
He hung his head guilty. I was appalled.
You told Mom!
Sorry.
I slammed the cruiser's door. That was Charlie saying sorry, by the way. I slammed the cruiser's door a little harder than necessary on my way
They're
out.
gonna yell at us.
Yeah, they can obviously hear it from downstairs. My mom was in hysterics, of course. I had to tell her I felt
fighting.
fine at least 30 times before she would calm down. Not fighting.
Yeah, but you guys said you told Mom.
Yeah.
So that
see if you're like, wait, didn't tell me anything. Okay, keep going.
Mom.
Go. We don't call her mom, so.
She begged me to come home, forgetting the fact that home was empty at the moment, but her pleas were easier to resist than I would have thought. I was consumed by the mystery Edward presented, and I'm more than a little obsessed by Edward himself. Stupid! I wasn't eager to escape Forks as I should be, as any normal, sane person would be. I decided that I might as well go to bed early that night. Charlie continued to watch me anxiously, and it was getting on my nerves. I stopped on my way to grab 3 Tylenol from the bathroom. They did help, and as the pain ceased, I drifted to sleep. That was the first night I dreamed of Edward
that's so
Cullen.
creepy.
End of chapter 3. Chapter 4.
Invitations.
In my dream, this is the dream she has with Edward. In my dream, it was very dark, and what dim light there was seemed to be radiating from Edward's skin. I couldn't see his face, just his back, as he walked away from me, leaving me in the blackness. No matter how fast I ran, I couldn't catch up to him. No matter how loud I called, he never turned. Troubled, I woke in the middle of the night and couldn't sleep again. Sorry, continue. I couldn't sleep again for what seemed like a very long time.
I'm sorry, I'm sweating because it's
After that, he was in my dreams nearly every night, but always on the periphery, never within reach. The month that followed the accident was uneasy, tense, and at first embarrassing. To my dismay, I found myself the center of attention for the rest of that week. Tyler Crowley was impossible, following me around, obsessed with making amends to me somehow. I tried to convince him what I wanted more than anything else was for him to forget all about it, especially since nothing had actually happened to me, but he remained insistent. He followed me between classes and sat at our now crowded lunch table. Mike and Eric were even less friendly toward him than they were to each other, which made me worry that I'd gained another unwelcome fan. No one seemed concerned about Edward, though I explained over and over that he was the hero. How he had pulled me out of the way and had nearly been crushed, too. I tried to be convincing. Jessica, Mike, Eric, and everyone else always commented that they hadn't even seen him there till the van was pulled away. I wondered to myself why no one else had seen him standing so far away before he was suddenly, impossibly saving my life. With chagrin, I realized the probable cause. No one else was aware of Edward, as I always was. No one else watched him the way I did. How pitiful. Edward was never surrounded by crowds of curious bystanders eager for his first-hand account. People avoided him as usual. The Cullens and the Hale sat at the same table as always, not eating, talking only amongst themselves. None of them, especially Edward, glanced my way anymore. When he sat next to me in class, as far from me as the table would allow, he seemed totally unaware of my presence. Only now and then, when his fist would suddenly ball up, skin stretched even wider over the bones, did I wonder if he wasn't quite as oblivious as he appeared. He wished he hadn't pulled me from the path of Tyler's van. There was no other conclusion I could come to. I wanted very much to talk to him, and the day after the accident I tried. The last time I'd seen him outside the ER, we'd both been furious. I was still angry that he wouldn't trust me with the truth, even though I was keeping my part of the bargain flawlessly.
He did ask about her whole life.
Yeah, why did your parents divorce? I know we met 5 minutes ago, but he had in fact saved my life, no matter how he'd done it. And overnight, the heat of my anger faded into odd gratitude. He was already seated when I got to biology, looking straight ahead. I sat down expecting him to turn toward me. He showed no sign that he realized I was there.
Hello, Edward,
I said pleasantly to show him how I was going to behave myself. He turned his head a fraction toward me without meeting my gaze, nodded once, and then looked the other way. That was the least contact I had with him. Though he was there, a foot away from me, every day. I watched him sometimes, unable to stop myself from a distance, though, in the cafeteria or parking lot. I watched as his golden eyes grew perceptibly darker day by day. But in class, I gave no more notice that he existed than he showed toward me. I was miserable, and the dreams continued. Despite my outright lies, the tenor of my emails alerted Renee to my depression, and she called a few times, worried. I tried to convince her it was just the weather that had me down. Mike, at least, was pleased by the obvious coolness between me and my lab partner. I could see he'd been worried that Edward's daring rescue might have impressed me, and he was relieved that it seemed to have the opposite effect. Gosh, she thinks everyone just cares. She thinks they're all around. He grew more confident, sitting on the edge of my table to talk before biology class started, ignoring Edward as completely as he ignored us. The snow washed away for good after that one dangerously icy day. Mike was disappointed he'd never gotten to stage a snowball fight, but pleased that the beach trip would soon be possible. The rain continued heavily and the weeks passed. Jessica made me aware. Girls' Choice Spring Dance in 2 weeks. Okay. This is about the dance, okay?
Are you sure you don't mind? You weren't planning to ask him.
She persisted when I told her I didn't mind in the least.
No, Jess! Not going!
I assured her. Dancing was glaringly outside my range of abilities.
It'll be really fun.
Her attempt to convince me was half-hearted. I suspected that Jessica enjoyed my inexplicable popularity more than my actual company.
Have fun with Mike!
I encouraged. The next day I was surprised that Jessica wasn't her usual gushing self in Spanish. She was silent as she walked by my side between classes, and I was afraid to ask her why. If Mike had turned her down, I was the last person she would want to tell. My fears were strengthened during lunch when Jessica sat far as Mike as possible, chatting animatedly with Eric. Mike was unusually quiet. Mike was still quiet as they walked me to class, the uncomfortable look on his face a bad sign. But it didn't broach the subject until I was in my seat and he was perched on my desk. As always, I was electrically aware of Edward sitting close enough to touch, as distant as if he were merely an invention of my imagination. So, Mike said, looking at the floor,
Jessica asked me to spring dance. That's great!
I made my voice bright and enthusiastic.
You'll have a lot of fun with Jessica!
He floundered as he examined my smile, clearly not happy with my response.
I told her to think about it. Why would you do that?
I let disapproval color my tone, though I was relieved that he hadn't given her an absolute no. His face was bright red as he looked down again. Pity shook my resolve.
I was wondering if you might be planning to ask me.
I paused for a moment, hating the wave of guilt that swept through me, but I saw from the corner of my eye Edward's head tilt reflexively in my direction.
Mike, I think you should tell her yes!
I said.
Did you already ask someone?
Did Edward notice how Mike's eyes flickered in his direction?
No!
I assured him!
I'm not going to the dance at all!
Mike demanded. I didn't want to get into the safety hazards that dancing presented, so I quickly made new plans.
I'm not going to Seattle that Saturday!
I explained. I needed to get out of town anyway. It was suddenly the perfect time to go.
Can't you go some other weekend? Sorry. No!
I said.
So you shouldn't make Jess wait any longer. It's rude!
Yeah, you're right. He mumbled and turned dejected to walk back to his seat. I closed my eyes and pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to push the guilt and sympathy out of my head. Mr. Banner began talking. I sighed and opened my eyes. They're not at lunch.
whatever, and
class.
And Edward was staring at me curiously, that same familiar edge of frustration even more distinct now in his black eyes. I stared back, surprised, expecting him to look quickly away, but instead he continued to gaze with probing intensity into my eyes. There was no question of me looking away. My hands started to shake.
Mr. Cullen?
The teacher asked, seeking the answer to a question I hadn't heard.
The grand cycle.
Edward answered, seeming reluctant as he turned to look at Mr. Banner. I looked down at my book, and as soon as his eyes released me, trying to find my place, cowardly as ever, I shifted my hair over to my right shoulder and hit my face. I couldn't believe the rush of emotion pulsing through me just because he happened to look at me for the first time. Sipping? The first time in a half dozen weeks. That's 6 weeks. I couldn't allow him to have this level of influence over me. It was pathetic. More than pathetic. It was unhealthy. I tried very hard not to be aware of him for the rest of the hour, and since that was impossible, at least not to let him know that I was unaware of him. When the bell rang at last, I turned my back to him to gather my beings, expecting him to leave immediately as usual.
But no!
His voice shouldn't have been so familiar to me, as if I'd known the sound of it all my life rather than for just a few short weeks. I turned slowly, unwillingly. I didn't want to feel that I knew I would feel when I looked at his too perfect face. My expression was wary when I finally turned to him again. His expression was unreadable. He didn't say anything.
What? Are you speaking to me again?
I finally asked, an unintentional note of petulance in my voice. His lips twitched, fighting a smile.
No, not really,
he admitted. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly through my nose, aware that I was gritting my teeth. Why did she do that so much? He waited.
What do you want, Edward?
I asked, keeping my eyes closed. It was easier to talk to him coherently that way.
Sorry.
He sounded sincere.
I'm being very rude, I know, but it's better that way. Really?
I opened my eyes. Her eyes were closed the whole time. He was saying
I don't know.
I opened my eyes. His face was very serious.
I don't know what you mean!
I said, my voice guarded.
It's better not friends,
he explained.
Trust me.
My eyes narrowed. I'd heard that before.
It's too bad you didn't figure that out earlier.
I hissed through my teeth.
You could have saved yourself all this regret.
Regret?
The word and my tone obviously caught him off guard.
Regret for what?
We're not letting that stupid van squash me!
We're not just little.
He was astonished. He stared at me in disbelief. When he finally spoke, he almost sounded mad.
You think I regret saving your life?
I know you do!
I snapped.
You don't know anything.
He was definitely mad. I turned my head sharply away from him, clenching my jaw against all the wild accusations. What?
Does she have, like, TMJ or something?
I don't know. I turned my head, clenching my jaw against all the wild accusations I wanted to hurl at him. I gathered my... Where did I spit?
Mm-hmm.
I gathered my books together, then stood and walked to the door. I meant to sweep dramatically out of the room, but of course I caught the toe of my boot on the door jamb and dropped my books. I stood there a moment thinking about leaving them. Then I sighed and began to pick them up. He was there. He'd already stacked them into a pile. He handed them to me, his face hard. It's your line.
Thank you!
They're gonna come up and yell at us.
Okay.
You're welcome.
You're retarded.
Just pause it.
Just realized that the good microphone wasn't plugged in, and half of the chapter was set on the computer microphone instead of the real one. So sorry about that.
Stop, no. Anyway. Okay, it's right here. He retorted.
I straightened up swiftly, turned away from him again, and stalked off to the gym without looking back. Gym was brutal. We'd moved on to baseball.
It's not brutal.
My team never passed me the ball, so
You suck.
that was good, but I fell down a lot. Sometimes I took people with me. Today it was worse than usual because my head was so filled with Edward and Judge.
Just go. I can't see.
I tried to concentrate on my feet, but he kept creeping back my thoughts
Stop
just when I
laughing.
really needed my balance. It was a
Stop.
It was a relief as always to leave. I almost ran to the truck. There were just so many people I wanted to avoid. The truck had suffered only minimal damage in the accident. I'd had to replace the taillights, and I had a real paint job. If I'd had a real paint job, I would have touched that up. Tyler's parents had to sell their van for parts. I almost had a stroke when I rounded the corner and saw a tall, dark figure leaning against the side of my truck. Then I realized it was just Eric. I started walking again.
Hey, Eric.
I called.
Hi, Bella.
What's up?
I said as I was unlocking the door. I wasn't paying attention to the uncomfortable edge in his voice, so his next words took me by surprise.
I was just wondering if you would go to the spring dance with me.
His voice broke on the last word.
I thought it was a girl's choice!
I said, too startled to be diplomatic.
Well, yeah.
He admitted shamefaced. I recovered my composure and tried to make my smile warm.
Thank you for asking me, but I'm gonna be in Seattle that day. Oh,
He said.
well, maybe next time. Sure!
I agreed and then bit my lip. I wouldn't want him to take that too literally. He slouched off back toward the school. I heard a low chuckle. Edward was walking past the front of my truck, looking straight forward, his lips pressed together. I yanked the door open and jumped inside, slamming it loudly behind me. I revved the engine deafeningly and reversed out into the aisle. Edward was in his car already, 2 spaces down, sliding out smoothly in front of me, cutting me off. He stopped there to wait for his family. I know. I could see that the 4 of them were walking this way, but still by the cafeteria. I considered taking out the rear of his shiny Volvo, but there were too many witnesses. I looked in my rear view mirror. A line was beginning to form directly behind me. Tyler Crowley was in his recently acquired used Sentra waving. I was too aggravated to acknowledge him. While I was sitting there, he looked everywhere but at the car in front of me. Oh, while I was sitting there looking everywhere but the car in front of me, I heard a knock on my passenger side window. I looked over. It was Tyler. I glanced back in my rear view mirror, confused. His car was still running, the door left open. I leaned across the cab to crank the window open. It was stiff. I got it halfway down, then gave up.
I'm sorry, Tyler. I'm stick behind Colin.
I'm stuck behind Colin.
That's what I said.
You said I'm stick behind
I said
Colin.
stuck, but it sounded.
I was annoyed. Obviously, the holdup wasn't my fault.
Oh, I know. I just want to ask you something while we're trapped here.
He grinned. This could not be happening.
Will you ask me to the spring dance?
Why is he British? He continued.
I'm not gonna be in town, Tyler.
My voice sounded a little
Why is everyone
sharp.
asking her?
I know. I had to remember it wasn't his fault that Mike and Eric had already used up my quota of patience for the day. Oh no, so many people like me. My life is so hard.
Yeah, Mike, that.
Mike said
Oh.
He admitted.
Then why?
He shrugged.
I was hoping you were just letting him down easy.
Okay, it was completely his fault.
Sorry, Tyler.
I said, working to hide my irritation.
I really am going out of town.
That's cool. We still have prom.
And before I could respond, he was walking back to his car. I could feel the shock on my face. I leaned forward to see Alice, Rosalie, Emmett, and Jasper all sliding into the Volvo. In his rear view mirror, Edward's eyes were on me. He was unquestionably shaking with laughter, as if he had heard every word Tyler had said. My foot itched toward the gas pedal.
What? Oh, I thought you were going to say my foot itched.
It did.
No,
It says my foot itched, like a bug bite itch. Itched
Towards the
toward the
pedal.
gas pedal. One little bump wouldn't hurt any of them, just that glossy silver paint job. I revved the engine, but they were all in and Edward was speeding away. I drove home slowly, carefully, muttering to myself the whole way. When I got home, I decided to make chicken enchiladas for dinner. It was a long process, and it would keep me busy. While I was simmering the onions and the chilies, the phone rang. I was almost afraid to answer it, but it might be Charlie or my mom. It was Jessica, and she was jubilant. Mike had called her after school to accept her invitation. I celebrated with her briefly while I stirred. She had to go, and she wanted to call Angela and Lawrence to tell them. I suggested with casual innocence that maybe Angela, the shy girl who had biology with me, could ask Eric. And Lauren, the standoffish girl who had always ignored me at the lunch table, could ask Tyler. I heard he was still available. I don't care about this, though. I gave her my Seattle excuse. I hung up and tried to concentrate on dinner, dicing the chicken especially.
Okay.
I didn't want to take another trip to the emergency room,
What?
but my head...
Chicken?
Chicken was what sent her to the emergency room the first time. It wasn't getting hit by a car. But my head was spinning, trying to analyze every word Edward had spoken today. What did he mean? It was better if we weren't friends. My stomach twisted as I realized what he must have meant. He must see how absorbed I was by him. He must not want to lead me on, so we couldn't even be friends, because he wasn't interested in me at all. Of course he wasn't interested in me. I thought angrily, my stinging, delayed reaction to the onions. I wasn't interesting, and he was. Interesting, and brilliant, and mysterious, and perfect, and beautiful, and possibly able to lift full-size fans with one hand. Well, that was fine. I could leave him alone. I would leave him alone. I would get through my self-imposed sentences here in purgatory, and then hopefully some school in the Southwest or possibly Hawaii would offer me a scholarship. I focused my thoughts on sunny beaches and palm trees as I finished the enchiladas and put them in the oven. Charlie seemed suspicious when he came home and smelled the green peppers. I couldn't blame him. The closest edible Mexican food was probably in Southern California, but he was a cop. What?
I just hear people walking. No, I heard someone go up the stairs. I heard them creak, crack. Go.
He was a cop. He seemed to like it. It was fun to watch as he slowly began trusting me in the kitchen.
Dad.
I asked when he was almost done.
Yeah, Bella.
I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to Seattle for the day a week from Saturday. If that's okay.
I didn't want to ask permission. It set a bad precedent, but I felt rude, so I tacked it on at the end.
Why?
He sounded surprised, as if he were unable to imagine something that Forks couldn't offer.
Well, I want to get a few books. The library here is pretty limited. Maybe look at some clothes.
I had more money than I was used to having since. Thanks to Charlie, I didn't have to pay for the car. No, it's just the way you added that on.
Just go.
Not that the truck didn't cost me quite a bit in the gas department.
That truck probably didn't get a good gas mileage.
You said, echoing my thoughts.
I know. I'll stop in Montesano and Olympia and Tugamo if I have to.
Are you gonna be all by yourself?
He asked, and I couldn't tell if he was suspicious I had a secret boyfriend or just worried about the car trouble.
Yeah!
Seattle's a big city. You could get lost.
He fretted.
Dad, Phoenix is 5 times the size of Seattle, and I can read a map. Don't worry about it.
Do you want me to come with you?
I tried to be crafty as I hid my horror.
That's all right, Dad. I'll probably just be in dressing rooms all day. Very boring.
Oh, okay.
The thought of sitting in women's clothing stores for any period of time immediately put him off.
Thanks!
I
What?
I smiled at him.
Will you be back in time for the dance?
Grr. Only, it says Grrr.
Grr.
Grr. Only in a town this small would a father know when the high school dances were.
No! I don't dance, Dad.
He of all people should understand that. I didn't get my balance problems from my mother. He did understand.
Oh, that's right.
He realized. The next morning when I pulled into the parking lot, I deliberately parked as far as possible from the silver Volvo. I didn't want to put myself in the path of too much temptation and end up owing him a new car. Getting out of the cab, I fumbled with my key and it fell into a puddle at my feet. As I bent over to get it, a white hand flashed out and grabbed it before I could. I jerked upright. Edward Cullen was right next to me, leaning casually against my truck.
How do you do that?
I asked in amazed irritation.
The what?
He held up my key. He held my key out as he spoke. As I reached for it, he dropped it into my palm.
Appear out of thin air.
Bella, it's not my fault if you're exceptionally unobservant.
His voice was quiet as usual, velvet, muted. I scowled at his perfect face. His eyes are light again today, a deep golden honey color. Then I had to look down to reassemble my now tangled thoughts.
What's the traffic jam last night?
I demanded, still looking away.
I thought you were supposed to be pretending I didn't exist, not irritating me to death.
That was Tyler's sake,
That
not
was for
mine.
Tyler's sake.
That was one word.
I had to give him this chance.
He snickered. One word makes a big difference, Bill.
Yo!
I gasped. You, that's the word you said. You didn't just scream. You, I gasped. That didn't sound like a word, dude.
Doesn't matter.
It does.
You're ruining the book. Audio. Come on, go.
I couldn't think of a bad enough word. I felt like the heart of my anger should physically burn him, but he only seemed more amused.
And I'm not pretending you don't exist.
He continued.
So you are trying to irritate me to death. Since Tyler's van didn't do the job.
Anger flashed in his tawny eyes. His lips pressed into a hard line. All signs of humor gone.
Bella, you were utterly absurd.
He said, his low voice cold. My palms tingled. I wanted so badly to hit something. I was surprised at myself. I was usually a non-violent person. I turned my back and started to walk away.
Wait,
He called. I kept walking, sloshing angrily through the rain, but he was next to me, easily keeping pace.
I'm sorry. That was rude.
He said as we walked. I ignored him.
I'm not saying it isn't true,
He continued.
but it is rude to say it anyway.
Wait, what did he say that was rude?
I don't know. Why won't you just leave me alone?
I grumbled.
I wanted to ask you something, but you sidetracked me.
He chuckled. He seemed to have recovered his good humor.
Do you have multiple personality disorder?
I asked severely.
You're doing it again.
I sighed.
Fine then! What do you want to ask?
I was
wondering if, a week from Saturday, the day of the spring dance.
Are you trying to be funny?
I interrupted him, wheeling toward him. My face got drenched as I looked up at his expression. His eyes were wickedly amused.
Will you please allow me to finish?
I bit my lip and clasped my hands together, interlocking my fingers so I couldn't do anything rash.
I heard you were going to Seattle that day, and I was wondering if you wanted to ride.
That was unexpected.
What?
I wasn't sure what he was getting at.
Do you want to ride to Seattle?
With who?
Thank you. I asked, mystified.
Myself, obviously.
He enunciated every syllable as if he were talking to someone mentally handicapped. I was still stunned.
Why?
Well, I was planning to go to Seattle in the next few weeks, and to be honest, I'm not sure if your truck can make it.
My truck works just fine. Thank you very much for your concern.
I started to walk again, but I was too surprised to maintain the same level of anger.
But can your truck make it up in one tank of gas?
He matched my pace again.
I don't see how that is any of your business.
Stupid shiny Volvo owner.
The wasting of finite resources is everyone's business.
Honestly, Edward!
I felt a thrill go through me as I said his name, and I hated it.
I can't keep up with you. I thought you didn't want to be my friend.
I said it would be better if we weren't friends, not that I didn't want to be.
Oh,
No,
thanks.
we already got that. Heavy sarcasm. I realized I had stopped walking again. We were under the shelter of the cafeteria roof now, so I could more easily look at his face, which certainly didn't help my clarity of thought.
I thought it would be more prudent
Oh,
of you not
thanks.
to...
Now that's all cleared up!
I'm sorry.
Stop. He explained.
But I'm tired of trying to stay away from you. Bella.
His eyes were gloriously intense as he uttered that last sentence. His voice smoldering. Go. His voice. I couldn't remember how to breathe.
Will you go?
With me to Seattle!
I couldn't speak yet, so I just nodded. He smiled briefly, and then his face became serious.
You really should stay away from me.
He warned.
I'll see you in class.
He turned abruptly and walked the way he had come.